Welcome to Spring LIB.
All right, so for this question, at its core, it's asking for the consequences of global climate change, which in and of itself could be an essay question. Thankfully, we get the benefit of the multiple choice options, so we can delineate between which ones fit the question better. And in this question in particular, there's a certain wording in it that is kind of key for us to figuring out what the right answer is. And that is short-term and long-term effects. So in order to figure out the right answer, we need to make sure that the short-term effects are really short-term effects and the long-term ones are really long-term. Basically, short-term being the immediate causes that you might be able to see on sort of a year-to-year basis or even like within a generation. These things might go away if climate change is reversed or slowed down, or there might be some alleviation of them. Like, but long-term effects are those that would last longer than maybe like a generation, or could be like sort of stick around in the environment even long after change has maybe happened in the opposite direction. So those are kind of the baselines, the terms that we need to keep in the back of our heads as we're reading the answer choices. So let's get started and read through these and figure out which ones make the most sense given the question and the long-term and short-term parameters. So option A, we have short-term changes being melting of glaciers, rising in water levels, uh, which may cover islands that are close to sea level, and destroying of local ecosystems. So those are all short-term effects. Those are all things that we can see happening, currently. But like the rising in water levels and in melting of glaciers and in destruction of habitats are things that are happening. The latter could maybe be a long-term effect. So let's take a look at the long-term effects here, and maybe that'll give us another clue as to where this answer might lie in our possible choices. Long-term effects, this one says, are seasonal patterns, unseasonal rainfall, and life cycle of insect changes. Um, Changes in seasonal patterns is a long-term effect that could continue on for a time even after the temperature might slow its rise or might begin to drop off a little bit. That would take some adjusting to. So that one's correct. Unseasonal rainfall could be more short term, it could be long term, but then if it was long term, it would become seasonal rainfall. It would be a seasonal change. And then the last one, life cycle of insects, again, potentially long term, but more short term adaptation to changes in temperature. So A, I would say, is probably out. But we should look at, obviously, all of our options and just make sure that, none of the others are so egregiously wrong that A is our only option left. B tells us our short-term ones are seasonal patterns and seasonal rainfall. Already at the gate, I think it's safe to say we can dismark B because seasonal changes are not as short-term as, say, melting glaciers, especially because long-term changes in this option are flowering times of flowers, which would happen almost immediately and tend to change based on the climate as it is then. It's not something that would stick around even after, climate change has reversed or slowed down or something. Um, so that's sort of out of the gate already. Option C tells us short term, again, includes seasonal patterns, so we can probably discount that already. But let's take a look at the long term changes. Melting of glaciers, again, that's a short term effect. It's something that's happening, now every day. And once the temperature would start to fall off or, cool down a little bit, that would probably stop because glaciers are ice. And that's what ice does. So that leaves us with D, as looking like our only choice left, but let's read it and make sure it actually makes sense. Because if it doesn't, then we might have made a mistake and we should go back. So option D tells us that short-term effects include glaciers melting, check. Unseasonal rainfall, again, I think unseasonal is the key term here, and changes in the life cycles of insects and animals. Again, I think that is more in line with the short-term change, because if the climate were to change, in the next couple of centuries, that would be a quick adaptation. Like, it wouldn't stick around because it wouldn't be advantageous to the animal itself. It's not like a seasonal change, which are kind of like embedded in the weather patterns that would take longer to react to changes in the climate. And now then the long-term changes it gives us would be rise in water bodies that could cover islands close to sea level, destroying the local ecosystem. That is, I think, more of a long-term change than anything else, because it would be in effect for a long time unless, water levels fell off because of an ice age, say. In, a couple hundred years, that water level, if, the temperature maybe doesn't keep rising, but kind of levels out, would stay covering that island. The ecosystem would be destroyed, and even if, the water levels were to return down and the island were to come back above sea level, the ecosystem would be gone because everything would have drowned, pretty much. So I think that D is still, even after, it's passed both the process of elimination test and the correctness test, I think that is our